Welcome back to Around the Table with Stacy Smith as we take a look at the economy and investing. Every once in a while, we mention bonds. I'm going to bring them back up as a topic in our conversation today. The reason is that, of course, that rising interest rates have made bonds much more attractive. But how do you know which bonds or bond to choose? That's the question I'm posing now to Frank Rossetti. Frank.
Well, it's a very difficult thing to do unless you don't want to take risk and then you just buy treasury bonds, because they are the safest bond in the known civilization. And I expect that will continue because, unlike Europe, we still have a printing press. So we have an advantage in that regard over the Western world. That being said, there are all sorts of bonds that fit all sorts of needs and do all sorts of things depending on what you need them to do for you. Today, after years of pretty much being ignored, bonds are back in focus because they actually pay some interest. And if you take a average rate of inflation of 3 or 4%, it's actually a positive rate of return that we're seeing. Not on the current rate of inflation, but we must assume that eventually inflation will come down, as it has been. Slowly, but it's coming down nonetheless. And the problem with bonds is all the return you have is the interest. All right. And generally. And although there's convertible bonds, which that's not true. All right. So there's all these little subsections of bonds, and depending on what your objectives are, one or other may make sense for you. And I think that that end of the thing has become very exciting. And I'm going to throw in an economic thought. I think that part of the Fed's problem is, now that interest is being paid, there are 40 million retirees who are actually earning money on their money without taking risk, and they're spending those earnings, which is causing, to some degree, this economy to be a little better than it might have been if that hadn't happened. So the interest rate rise is adding to the problem in my mind, because the problem of expensive employees is not going to be fixed by raising interest rates.
Another factor in the decision is the investor's tax bracket. If you're a high tax-paying individual, you're going to want to look for tax-free bonds, and that's a whole marketplace in itself. And if you're not, then you would look at taxable bonds like treasuries or like corporate bonds. And then there's the division between good quality, medium quality, lesser quality. And then finally, the last factor is the duration of the bond, or how long are you willing to place your money. So all of those things have to be considered in making bond selections in a portfolio.
I think that, to oversimplify this for viewers, when you buy a bond, you're giving someone a loan, and they're going to pay you interest, and at some point in the future, they're going to pay you back. So you can loan your money to the government, you can loan it to corporations, you can loan it to municipalities. There are all kinds of entities out there that may issue bonds. And as an investor, you're just loaning them the money. So if you think about making a loan to someone, what considerations would go into making that loan? Who is it? Are they going to be able to pay me back? How long do I want to give up my money? What are they going to pay me in return? Is the interest going to be taxable or not? And you know, that's where all these different entities have different risks, have different tax consequences, and you kind of have to sort through. And as someone around the table would say, do your homework to be able to identify where your comfort level lies. And there is a risk-return relationship here, right? If you loan your money to someone that you're not sure if they're going to be able to pay it back, you're going to want a higher level of interest. So low interest, low risk. High interest, higher risk.
And that's my big takeaway. At my old job, I used to get calls from our clients saying, look at this bond, it's paying 16%. That might be nice, but I don't think you're going to get your money back. And this was at the time when maybe your savings was getting 25 basis points, so less than 1%. That interest rate was telling you it's highly unlikely that you're going to get your money back that you're lending. So I'm telling you an extreme example, but I'm trying to let you learn from somebody else's mistake. Don't buy that bond. That's too far out of what other bonds that are similar to it are paying.
We
You
need
see
to,
a big divergence, big risk.
yeah, we need to spend an entire segment, I think, I mean, entire program on this. But let me ask this question, because Frank, you mentioned it, that for a lot of people, the easiest way to go in, or maybe even one of the safest, are the U.S. Notes or bonds. You know, you have 2-year, 6-month, 5-year, 10-year, 30-year. How do you know which one to try to choose?
It depends on what you need the money to do for you. We're back to your objectives. If you have a need for the principal in 2 years, you probably ought to buy one that matures in 2 years. For example, now that rates went up, we're taking our 2 and 3 year cash requirements for our clients that are in the drawdown pay stage, and we're buying bonds that mature in January, so that in January they have the money for that year, the following January they have the money for that year, and we're using treasuries unless they're in a very high tax bracket. And the reason is they're paying over 4%, and that's the safest place to put the money, so that if the market goes down, those won't be affected much, if at all, and they're going to mature, and we feel very confident that the government will pay their debts. Even though sometime this summer they'll have a big brouhaha in Washington about not extending the budget. They go through this play every year, and it has the same ending every year. It's kind of like watching the Hallmark Channel.
All right, you mentioned ending. Unfortunately, this program is coming to an end. I want to once again thank all of you for joining us, and Frank and Bob and Kim and Carrie. And I hope that you join us again next time for Around the Table with Stacy Smith.